let me shift focus over to the United States. Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has sharpened his agenda targeting the LGBTQ community. This as a state board approved a ban on classroom instructions about sexual orientation and gender identity in all grades. The law has banned lessons up to grade 3 at the request of DeSantis as he gears up for an expected presidential run in 2024. The critics call it the Don't Say Gay law, followed by President Joe Biden calling the move hateful. The rule change would ban lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity from grade 4 up to 12. That's a time when students are becoming aware of their sexuality. Moreover, the House has now passed bills on gender transition treatments, bathroom use, and keeping children out of drag shows. What will this mean for the United States and for the upcoming presidential poll, rather the politics of the presidential race of 2024? Let me quickly bring in my guest today, Christina Haley, who's a Democrat strategist, joins me live right now. Christina, thank you so much for joining in. What explains this aggressive conservative agenda of the Republicans?
You know, I think it's important to make sure that we separate kind of the three different issues you talked about, right? Whether it's the legislation addressing education, addressing actual procedures on body types and different things like that. But I think particularly when we're looking at DeSantis and what he's done with this Don't Say Gay expansion, I'm to be honest, I don't even know the official word of the name of the bill, because the Republicans even want it to be called that. Because at the end of the day, it's a signaling system. It's a way of keeping people talking about an issue that is quite honestly contrived and keeps them away from talking about things like gun reform. Our children are more at risk of getting shot and killed at school every day in the United States than they are of even hearing the word gay. I think it's also important to note that there is not an example of any curriculum or anything being taught in Florida public schools. I myself am a product of the Volusia County public school system in Central Florida. And I can tell you, yes, did we have anatomy classes and different things like that that taught us about the physical, biological happenings of human beings? Yes, but this has never been an issue. And if you actually read into the legislation, it still allows for that. It still allows for the anatomy classes and the teaching. So at the end of the day, it's really kind of a marketing ploy for the Republicans. It's something to keep the drumbeat going on frankly, homophobic thoughts when it really actually doesn't do anything. And it allows the governor to tout a win before his announcement of a presidential run and different things like that, and to entice their base.
It's interesting that you spoke about the liberal culture of Florida. How is this move going to now impact the LGBTQ community in Florida and the overall culture over there?
Well, I think it does. I mean, I don't want to minimize the impact it has by saying that it's not an actual issue because there isn't actually curriculum being taught like that. But the impact that it has is it further allows people to stigmatize the LGBTQIA community. And in Florida, you know, there is a strong LGBTQA community, but at the same time, there also are a lot of people who are feeling emboldened. And it's been happening more and more since the kind of what I would consider called the Trump wave, or this kind of wave of the far right. It's not to say all Republicans are adamantly opposed or homophobic. And it's also not to say that all Democrats believe the same thing either, but it is going to create a stigma and cause for homophobia to grow even more.
Right. House Republicans have voted on barring trans athletes from women's sports. We know it will be dead in a Democrat-controlled Senate, but what explains the House Republican proposal?
I think it goes along right again with this idea of making sure that the issue of trans rights stays in the forefront. As much as they want to claim that the far left is the one, you know, pushing trans agenda, or, you know, however they talk about it, they're wanting to keep it there. And unfortunately for their voters and their supporters, that means they're not focused on the actual issues. So I also, you know, preface that with saying the sports conversation and physical activity conversation is one that I think needs to be a bit more nuanced and discussed in depth. I myself am a former athlete and can see the multiple sides of this. And it feels like they're tossing out these kind of triggering pieces of legislations or proposals that really won't go anywhere or actually do anything. But again, it allows for this negative stigma to continue to grow against a community that is just trying to earn their civil rights. And again, I can't harp on this enough. Our country is facing so many horrible issues, not the least of which is gun violence on a daily basis. We just woke up to a child getting shot because their basketball went into a neighbor's yard, and things like that. And so it's just, I think we have to look at it, and you can almost give a little bit of praise for it being such an effective tool. They are keeping this conversation at the forefront of every political discussion when it really doesn't affect most Americans, and it only creates an even more negative environment, we should say, for the LGBTQ
Absolutely. And
community.
in fact, all the reports that I've been reading, Christina, I've also come across arguments being posed by the Democrats where they've in fact said that ignoring gender dysphoria in children can be psychologically harmful. But what are Democrats doing about it on the ground level?
I think, it's playing a little bit of defense, right? Because it is something that is new and emerging, right? So there's not a lot of laws out there that exist in general, whether it is against gender identity or, in support of gender identity. So it's starting to figure out how to move in a way that starts to allow a safer environment for people to be able to explore and express themselves. Now, I think, again, I like to be very careful and nuanced when we start to talk about this. I think there is a difference between identifying and then actual medical procedures and different things like that. And I've been talking to a lot of folks, actually friends of mine that are Trump supporters and would consider themselves, kind of in the Trump, DeSantis, far right camp. And when we really get to talk about these discussions, we get to the bottom of the fact of when you're talking about the education part or kids attending drag shows and whatever the claims are, it gets out to the point that most people agree that young children shouldn't be taught about any type of sex, sexuality, acts of sex, things like that. And it's really interesting because if you give yourself to have a conversation, and unfortunately in the United States, conversations aren't having, we get to that point. And so I think one of the things that is making it difficult for Democrats to just move supportive or protective legislation forward is that the Republicans are doing a very good job as keeping this as a very large conflict instead of something to think about how our country can grow, right? They're doing a very good job at controlling the narrative and making it adversarial instead of allowing for a conversation around it. Because I think they're scared that if Americans really start having real conversations about this, we'll start to realize that, you know what, we could probably find common ground and we should move on to the more pressing topics like inflation, gun reform, our fentanyl crisis. I could go on and actual issues that are affecting everyday Americans on a daily basis. And again, not to minimize the negative effects that it's having on the trans and LGBTQIA community. But again, I think the Republicans, I have to give credit, are doing a great job at keeping this at a level where no one can really calm it down, even if it is egregious and quite frankly, conjured up in many ways.
And to counter that kind of role, Christina, let's focus on the role of parents and doctors who also need to make decisions, sound decisions on treatment, not government. What would you like to say to that? Because let's not forget that the House sent Desantis another bill that bans children from an adult live performance, a proposal aimed at the governor's opposition to drag shows. And as you rightly, in fact, just mentioned, that it shouldn't be about drag shows, it should be about adult content and barring children from that.
Exactly. And, I'm somebody who goes to and enjoys drag shows. I've been to many. I can't say that my sample size speaks for the entire country, but I've never seen children at them. And again, at the end of the day, most parents wouldn't choose to take the children to, everywhere I've got is a boozy brunch. So it's already an age-controlled event, right? Again, I think some of these, there could be potential examples that I don't know about. I don't pretend to know every single thing that has happened in this country, but I think they're picking and choosing ways of which people can, be scared. I think on the other front, when we're talking about medical procedures and different things like that, again, I think it becomes a little bit more difficult, especially now that we live in a post-Roe v. World United States, where our human rights as women are being taken away. So, I think there's a very intelligent way to have a conversation about, hey, how can we allow children to explore, especially those who are trans children, to make them feel as comfortable as possible, but also to make sure that responsible medical decisions between parents, doctors, and children are being made. I think that's very important.
Right.
Again, and I think most Americans agree on that as well.
I agree with you on that too. Many thanks to you, Christina Haley, for joining in and sharing your precious inputs.